Dr. Litton, this is a really naughty story. Well, it is kind of. Kate Chopin's The Storm. Bet you weren't expecting something like this from someone writing in 1898. That's pretty steamy stuff. Unless you didn't read it carefully. I always have a student or two in one of my classes when we do The Storm, and they go, What? I didn't see it. And it's like, you weren't reading carefully. So if you were reading carefully, you picked up on the steaminess, shall we say, of this. We're going to get into it a little bit, not for any prurient reasons, but really to answer a couple of questions as we go along. First of all, you need to know that Kate Chopin was not originally from Louisiana, but wrote about Louisiana life quite a bit. I believe her family was from St. Louis, and she married a fellow named Chopin, moved down there to Louisiana, and just fell in love with the culture, the Creole culture, and language, and all of those things, and really dedicated a big chunk of her career to writing about that particular region. So she's one of a number of regional writers. As the country expanded westward and different areas and whatnot, people were interested in other parts of the country. It was a very large country, larger country size-wise than it is today. Think of a country that had just a few million people, but millions and millions of square miles, and people from all over the world were settling in different places. Scandinavians settling in Minnesota, Cajuns from Acadia, that's part of Canada, and they were relocated down there by the British when the British kicked the French out of Canada. Just all kinds of different people, German immigrants, Chinese immigrants, African Americans who are moving west for opportunities, who are moving north for opportunities. So the interest in regional fiction, which allowed a reader to find out about people in a different part of the country that seemed exotic or very different from where they grew up, was quite strong at the end of the 19th century. She had a terrible marriage herself. Are you surprised in a way? I mean, this is one story out of a series. It's a sequence of stories that we're reading with the same characters, or many of the same characters. And boy, it's a really different view of marriage from the norm of the era, isn't it? We'll dive into that in a second here, but suffice it to say that Chopin did not have a pleasant marriage, and outlived her husband, and they separated and lived separately for some substantial period of time. Let's dive into it and just get into a little bit of what was going on here. Of course, you've got Bibi and Bobino. They go to the store to get something, and Calixta is the wife. She's left at the home by herself. She's doing laundry or some such thing, and the storm is coming, and all of a sudden she sees a fellow ride up that she recognizes from her past, Alcée Labayère, who is a former, shall we say, boyfriend, right? And the story's quite explicit about what their past was like, what they do that afternoon while her husband and son are at the store, and so on. So she's out on the front porch when it's raining. He rides up and says, "Do you mind if I come inside and ride out the storm?" And she says, "Well, okay, that's fine." Notice a few little interesting things. This story is very heavy on symbolism, obviously. The storm, their passion, right? The crashing of the thunder and the rain, and all this kind of stuff. She noticed that when she tells him to come in, she's taking in the laundry, and it says, his voice and her own startled her as if from a trance, and she seized Bobino's vest, right? Her husband's vest, but there's nobody in. She grabs the vest and holds it to herself, and of course that vest is between her and Alcée, so it's symbolic of her husband, but her husband's where? Not there. Vest is empty, right? There's nobody to prevent this, so if she's not going to say no, he's not going to be there to chase Alcée away, and so we know what's going on there. She's had a child, right? Okay, so it says she was a little fuller of figure than 5 years before when she married. But she had lost nothing of her vivacity. Her blue eyes still retained their melting quality. Her yellow hair, disheveled by the wind and rain, kinked more stubbornly than ever about her ears and temples. The rain beat upon the low shingled roof with a force and clatter that threatened to break an entrance and deluge them there. Oh, the rain! It's raining really hard, boy. And of course, the author describes her as being a very voluptuous and very attractive woman. And, of course, conveniently, there's a thunderclap, and she squeals and jumps, and he puts his arms around her, and then, now we're off to the races, right? And you find out that Alcée is somebody from her past, a previous boyfriend. And if you read carefully, you find out a lot about their previous relationship without even reading the previous stories, which kind of elucidate that. Calixta put her hands to her eyes, and with a cry staggered backward. Alcée's arm encircled her, and for an instant he drew her close and spasmodically to him. Bonté, she cried, releasing herself from his encircling arm and retreating from the window. The house'll go next. If I only knew where Bibi was. She would not compose herself. She would not be seated. Alcée clasped her shoulders and looked into her face. The contact of her warm, palpitating body, when he had unthinkingly drawn her into his arms, had aroused all the old-time infatuation and desire for her flesh. Now, this is getting pretty racy for 1895, right? I mean, you got people are like palpitating and stuff, okay? That's a lot of palpitating. That's some serious stuff there. He pushed her hair back from her face that was warm and steaming. Her lips were as red and moist as pomegranate seed. Her white neck and a glimpse of her full, firm bosom. Ooh, they're talking bosoms here. Disturbed him powerfully. As she glanced up at him, the fear in her liquid blue eyes had given place to a drowsy gleam that unconsciously betrayed a sensuous desire. Okay, so what was initially no has become, well, maybe. And so he looked down into her eyes, and there was nothing for him to do but gather her lips in a kiss. It reminded him of Assumption. Now, Assumption is a parish, okay? In Louisiana, they have parishes. In Texas, we have counties. So people basically you told people where you lived by saying what county you lived in, right? It's a very rural area. Assumption Parish was where they were together, okay, as boyfriend and girlfriend. Read very carefully here. Do you remember in Assumption, Calixta? He asked her in a low voice, broken by passion. Oh, she remembered. For in Assumption he had kissed her and kissed her and kissed her until his senses would well nigh fail, and to save her he would resort to a desperate flight. Look at this carefully. If she was not an immaculate dove in those days, she was still inviolate. A passionate creature whose very defenselessness had made her defense, against which his honor forbade him to prevail. Right? Now let's decode that just a moment. He kissed her and kissed her and kissed her, but that's all they did. She was not an immaculate dove, meaning she wasn't like totally naive and innocent, but they had not done the deed, if I can be so blunt. And he doesn't push her. If he had, she probably would have. He doesn't. Why? Because his honor forbade him to do that. Why? Because she was supposed to get married to somebody else, right? So here the marriage theme comes in, right? She was supposed to marry Bobino. He knew that. They were in love. They had a thing. Boy, they had sparks a-flying. But he had to say, no, I can't go any further with her. Because he knew that if he did push her, she was going to go further. And there would be terrible consequences, right? Remember that. Marriage was, it was sacred. It was, you didn't have premarital sex, especially of this class. Now, lower class people, yeah, probably all the time, okay? But among this class of people, you did not do that. And it would have brought terrible shame and terrible consequences on Calixta had she done that and gotten pregnant. And so she's trying to tell you here, the narrator is, this is, okay, here's a man who very much desired her. She desired him. He may have even loved her very much. He did, actually. And she was certainly drawn to him. But he didn't do it. And the reason he didn't do it is because he cared enough for her not to get her in trouble. And now read on. Now Well, now, her lips seemed in a manner free to be tasted, as well as her round white throat and her whiter breasts. I mean, they've got breastises and stuff in here. People talking about this is a lot for 1898, isn't it? They did not heed the cry. Well, why now? Why now? Well, now because, well, if she got pregnant now, people might think, well, that's just a second child that she and Bobino have. Ooh, are you feeling a little uncomfortable? I mean, not only is it kind of uncomfortable in terms of reading this passion and kind of, there's something voyeuristic about it to me that makes me feel a little uncomfortable. But now I'm really uncomfortable. And if you're not uncomfortable yet with the situation, the consequences or lack thereof, you might be in a moment. They did not heed the crashing torrents, and the roar of the elements made her laugh as she lay in his arms. She was a revelation in that dim, mysterious chamber, as white as the couch she lay upon. She needs to get out and get a little sunshine, maybe. No, that was considered an ideal of upper-class white ladies to be very fair-skinned. I'm just teasing. Her firm, elastic flesh that was knowing for the first time its birthright was like a creamy lily. Golly, was like a creamy lily that the sun invites to contribute its breath and perfume to the undying life of the world. Now, let's get past the firm, elastic flesh, okay? But look at this first time, its birthright. Her flesh, her body was knowing for the first time its birthright. What is a birthright? You might want to Google it. A birthright, hey, in the Bible, Jacob and Esau, the story of Jacob and Esau, right? Esau foolishly trades away his birthright, meaning his inheritance, for a bowl of soup or stew or whatever, because Jacob was just smart and Esau was kind of dumb. A birthright is something you're entitled to from birth. How is it that her flesh is feeling its birthright for the first time in her life? Chopin is very clear on this. However you want to say this, she's saying something that's really kind of radical and shocking. More shocking than the sex part is the idea that Calixta is feeling for the first time physical sexual pleasure. And that is not a thing that women should be ashamed of or embarrassed about or hide or not talk about. Now, Chopin is not saying, well, let's just all talk about everything on a talk show, right? But she is saying that, no, this is not something that's just kind of nice. It's something women are entitled to. You're entitled to have a fulfilling physical relationship with someone you love. See, now there's the radical part of this. There's where it ties into marriage, because she's saying something here that's really important, that you need to think in terms of not just practicality for women of this class. They have physical desires, and those are natural, they're normal, there's nothing wrong with them. They should not be embarrassed about it. They should not be embarrassed to talk frankly but discreetly about them. And she's saying, this is your birthright. You're entitled to this. You're entitled to that in a relationship. A woman shouldn't feel badly about that. And a woman shouldn't say, well, I shouldn't expect that in a relationship. When he touched her breasts, they gave themselves up in quivering. There's just all kinds of quivering and stuff going on in here. Inviting his lips, her mouth was a fountain of delight, and when he possessed her, they seemed to swoon together at the very borderland of life's mystery. He stayed cushioned upon her, breathless, dazed, enervated, with his heart beating like a hammer upon her. With one hand she clasped his head, her lips lightly touching his forehead, the other stroked with a soothing rhythm his muscular shoulders. Look at that. Look at this. The description of him is as erotic as the description of her. And so what Chopin is saying is women are entitled to find pleasure, to find attraction in his muscular shoulders. This is not something that was really talked about much at that time. Certainly not an upper middle class writer like Chopin would be expected to write something like this. This would have been considered smut by a lot of people. The growl of the thunder was distant and passing away. The rain beat softly upon the shingles, inviting them to drowsiness and sleep, but they dared not yield. No, they better not, because that's how people get shot. The rain was over, the sun was turning the glistening green world into a palace of gems. Calixta on the gallery watched Alcée ride away. He turned and smiled at her with a beaming face, and she lifted her pretty chin in the air and laughed aloud. What? So I'm sure when you turn the page you think, okay, so when's everybody going to get their comeuppance, right? Well, as you see in section 4, Alcée is married too. Alcée writes to his wife, Clarice, who's at the beach with her girlfriends, enjoying a girl's vacation. And he says, "Oh, honey, don't hurry back home. You take your time and enjoy your time with your girlfriends." Yeah, I'll bet. But if she and the babies liked it in Biloxi, they should stay a month longer if they want to. He was getting along nicely, I'll say. And although he missed them, he was willing to bear the separation a while longer. Well, how good of him. Realizing that their health and pleasure were the first things to be considered. As for Clarice, Alcée's wife, she was charmed upon receiving her husband's letter. She and the babies were doing well. The society was agreeable. Many of her old friends and acquaintances were at the bay. And the first free breath since her marriage seemed to restore the pleasant liberty of her maiden days. She was liking getting a break from him. I'm liking not having a husband around all the time. I get to do what I want to. I get to go where I want to. I get to stay up late and play cards with the girls and laugh and have a couple of drinks and all that kind of stuff. And I don't have to worry about a stupid old husband ball and chain dragging me around. Devoted as she was to her husband, their intimate conjugal life was something which she was more than willing to forego for a while. In other words, she didn't miss the sex. Not now, right? Okay, for a while, for the time being, I can go without it. Okay, so I don't mind. So the storm passed, and everyone was happy. Bobino and Bibi come home, and they have a lovely dinner, and Calixta's very happy. I'm sure you were waiting for the consequences, but there wasn't any. There weren't any, I should say. Is she saying what people don't know won't hurt them? That infidelity is natural, to be expected? Is this some sort of critique of marriage as it was then? Marriages in her day and age, she's being critical of it and saying it's stifling, it's limiting, it's unfulfilling. You end up marrying somebody you're not terribly compatible with, either in the bedroom or anywhere else. And it's just normal that human beings are going to gravitate towards people who, flip their light switch on. Maybe marriage is one thing, sex is another. If that's what she's saying, and you have to decide for yourself what she's saying on it, it certainly is a highly radical thing, because it certainly was way outside the norm for the late 19th century for an upper middle class woman of her stature. Our next short story here, and we'll get started in it, because I want to make 3 videos, not 4, is Mary Wilkins Freeman's New England Nun. A very different portrayal of marriage, because it kind of doesn't happen. Well, it doesn't happen between Joe and Lily, as you might have thought. Louise, I should say. I should say Louise. Why did it say Lily? Sorry, it's Joe and Louise, not Joe and Lily. Later, Joe and Lily get together, but certainly Louise Ellis is our protagonist here, and she and Joe have been engaged for, I think, something like 14, 15 years, I believe. Pretty much as old as her dog has been, chained up in the backyard, and he comes back after earning his fortune. Now, here's the thing, okay? So if these are critiques of the marriage institution, that women who are writing and were saying, marriage is great, but the way we have it conceived now and the way it's constructed now and its limitations now are really a pain in the rear, because you got to abide by all these different things. I mean, there should be different types of marriages for different types of people, maybe. I don't know. Maybe that's what they're arguing here. Certainly in the case of Louise and Joe, who are betrothed, he goes away to Australia to earn his fortune, because it was expected that a man would not marry until he was able to provide substantially for his wife. Today we get married and we've got like $12.50 in our pocket, and we just say we don't need money. We have love, baby. Back in the 19th century, they would have said that is stupid and foolish, and it's only what dirt poor ignorant people do. If you want to make sure that you don't end up in the poorhouse and starving on a street corner, you better make sure you got money when you get married. Maybe there's something to that, I don't know. But it certainly was brought to an extreme. He goes off, she runs her own household, and what happens when they have this long courtship is they really just kind of grow apart for all those times. They're really kind of different people. And of course, she overhears that Joe and Lily really want to get together. I apologize for the typo there. Joe and Lily want to get together, but they can't, and Joe's the kind of man who's an honorable man. He says, I can't string a girl along for all those years and then not follow through. I got to do it. And then suddenly with that piece of information, she seizes on it and says, aha, I don't want to get married either. I was kind of dreading it, frankly. Not that I don't like Joe, but I don't really want to get married anymore. When I was younger, maybe I wanted to get married, but at this point in my life, I don't. I enjoy my independence. I enjoy my house. She's got all these different things around the house that she's always nervous that a man's going to break and trash and everything's the idea that men are gorillas and can't keep their boots off of the furniture. And she's kind of this stereotypical, spinster, old maid kind of person who, with her teacups and her doilies and things, has everything the way she wants it, and a man's just going to ruin all that, right? The house is a metaphor for her life. Okay, the house is the way she wants it. Her life is the way she wants it. She doesn't want some man intruding into the house. She doesn't want some man intruding into the life. She has the life she wants. Now, you and I might look at it and say, oh, dear thing, poor lonely heart, poor lonely heart. I think Freeman's trying to say, look, marriage isn't for everybody. Marriage isn't for everybody. There are a lot of people who maybe if they were younger wanted to be married, but if time passes, they say, I actually kind of like being single. I get to do what I want to. I get to have my world the way I want it. I'm in charge of my own life. I can experience what I want. Are you giving up something? Well, yeah, that's true, but maybe that's worth it. We all give up things when we make choices. So what is Mary Wilkins Freeman sort of saying about this? Is she saying that there's something wrong with marriage, or there's something wrong with the expectation that everybody ought to be married? Or that marriage is something that might be appropriate at one point in your life, but in later life, maybe it's not a good idea. Who's to say? The tale itself is a very tidy telling, to alliterate there as well, because it has the right pivot, the sort of the reveal there of Lily and Joe's conversation that she kind of overhears a bit, and says, I ain't got a word to say. I don't know what you could say. Not a word to say. Repeated Joe, drawing out his words heavily. I ain't sorry. That happened yesterday, that we kind of let on how we felt to each other. I guess it's just as well we knew. Of course, I can't do anything different. I'm going to go right on and get married next week. I ain't going back on a woman that's waited for me 14 years and break her heart, right? These are all good people. That's the great thing about it. These are all great people. There's no villain in this story. They're just people who, if it hadn't been for just a stroke of good luck, would have all three been miserable human beings. And now all three of them can be happy, because one marriage is not going to take place and another one is. So I don't think it's necessarily anti-marriage. It's anti-marriage cookie cutter for everybody, right? It depends on your circumstances, kind of thing. Well, we'll end with a third video here, and it's going to be a complex story that you may or may not have read before, but it's fascinating. The Yellow Wallpaper.